Lyra had spent 3 centuries watching humanity fail at every important endeavor. She stood in the observation chamber of the Galactic Council headquarters, her silver eyes fixed on the document floating before her. The report was written in clear, formal language, but the implications were catastrophic. Humanity had discovered the dragons, not just discovered them, but claimed to have formed peaceful connections with them. The whole idea was absurd. Lyra knew this with absolute certainty because she had studied the ancient texts. Dragons were creatures of pure instinct and aggression. They had existed since before most civilizations even emerged from their homeworlds. They were apex predators with no capacity for the kind of emotional sophistication that real bonding would require. Humans could not possibly have achieved what the report claimed. They simply did not have the necessary qualities. She thought back to her first encounter with humans 300 years ago. They had arrived at the elven world of Elthomus with their crude weapons and their hunger for expansion. The initial contact should have been peaceful, but humans had interpreted the elves' careful neutrality as weakness. They had attacked the outer settlements, and the elves had been forced to defend themselves with magical technology that made the human weapons look like children's toys. After that first conflict, a grudging peace had been established. But Lyra had never forgotten the violence in the humans' eyes. She had never forgotten how quickly they moved to take what was not theirs. She had never forgotten that they were a species driven by hunger, by conquest, by an endless need to dominate their environment and everything in it. And now they claimed to be different. Now they claimed that they had learned compassion. The Galactic Council wanted her to investigate the claims because she was the foremost expert on human behavior. They wanted her to verify the impossible. Lyra stood and walked to the observation window. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, and somewhere among them was the human vessel called the Starlight Navigator. It was there that the humans claimed to have bonded with dragons. It was there that they wanted to prove to the galaxy that they had evolved beyond their destructive nature. She did not want to go. Every instinct told her that this was a setup, a manipulation designed to gain the elves' trust so humans could strike at them when their guard was down. The Galactic Council had endorsed this investigation, but they were naive. They did not understand the human capacity for deception, yet she had no choice. The Council had given her a direct order, and Lyra had always followed orders. She was a warrior and a diplomat, and her duty was to her people first and foremost. If this was indeed a human trick, then she would expose it. And if humans had somehow managed this impossible feat, then the galaxy needed to know that too, so they could prepare for whatever new threat humans might pose. The journey to the Starlight Navigator took 12 days. Lyra spent most of that time reviewing the files on human behavior and dragon physiology. The more she read, the more convinced she became that the whole thing was impossible. Dragons required a special combination of factors to bond with anything. They needed to see their bonding partner as an equal. They needed to trust them completely. They needed to sense something in that individual that spoke to their deepest nature. Humans were none of those things. They were aggressive, territorial, and limited in their perception. How could they possibly understand a dragon's deep inner nature when they could barely understand each other? When the Starlight Navigator came into view, Lyra felt a strange sensation in her chest. The ship was massive, a gleaming fortress of human engineering. It was beautiful in an austere way, all clean lines and purposeful design. She hated that she found it beautiful. She hated that humans had managed to create something that inspired wonder in her ancient heart. The docking procedure was smooth and efficient. As she walked through the corridors of the human ship, Lyra observed everything with a critical eye. The crew moved with purpose and coordination. They greeted her with respect but not obsequiousness. They did not treat her as an inferior, but neither did they treat her as a threat. They treated her as a dignitary, which was exactly what she was. Commander Marcus was waiting for her in the central hub. He was a large man with weathered features and the bearing of someone who had seen too much war. His eyes were kind, which annoyed her. Lyra did not want to see kindness in human eyes. It made it harder to maintain her certainty about their nature. "Ambassador Lyra," he said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome aboard the Starlight Navigator. We are honored to have you here." Lyra took his hand briefly, noting that his grip was firm but not aggressive. "I am here to investigate your claims," she said coldly. "I make no judgment about your species' intentions, but I am skeptical." Marcus smiled. It was a sad smile filled with understanding. Your skepticism is warranted, he said. 6 months ago, I would have said the same thing about what we have achieved here. Come, I will show you everything. They walked through the ship and Marcus explained the situation. He told her about how they had discovered the dragons living in a hidden sector of space, dormant in crystalline formations that appeared to be artificial in nature. He told her how a team of explorers had accidentally triggered the awakening of these dragons. He told her how instead of attacking, the dragons had seemed curious. It sounded like a fantasy story, the kind of thing that children read before they fell asleep. Lyra listened with growing skepticism. When they arrived at the observation deck overlooking the hangar, she almost gasped. 3 dragons were visible through the massive transparent panels. They were larger than any creature Lyra had ever seen, and they moved with a grace that belied their massive size. One was deep crimson with scales that caught the light like precious gems. The second was also crimson but slightly smaller, with intricate patterns along its sides. The third was a brilliant emerald green with golden markings that seemed to glow with their own light. They were the most magnificent and terrifying things Lyra had ever witnessed. This is where the real work happens, Marcus said quietly. This is where we have learned to connect with them, not through dominance or control, but through genuine understanding. Lyra watched as several humans moved through the hangar below. They approached the dragons with no weapons and no fear. One young woman with auburn hair walked directly to the largest crimson dragon and placed her forehead against its snout. The dragon made a low rumbling sound and the woman seemed to relax completely. That is Lieutenant Kelly and her bonded partner Emberclaw, Marcus explained. They have been bonded for 8 months now. Before the bonding, Kelly was dying from an infection she contracted on a mining colony. We thought we would lose her. Then the dragons arrived and Emberclaw chose to save her life by sharing his essence with hers. That proves nothing, Lyra said, but her voice wavered slightly. Dragons can be programmed. Your military could have created a biological programming system to make them respond to human stimulus. Marcus shook his head. We did not create the dragons. They are ancient beings, far older than human civilization. They predate even your elven culture, Ambassador. They existed in dormancy for reasons we do not yet understand, and they chose to bond with us not because we made them, but because they wanted to. Lyra felt something shift in her certainty, and she did not like the feeling. She wanted to dismiss what she was seeing, to find logical explanations that fit within her understanding of the world. But watching Kelly and Emberclaw together, she could see something that transcended her ability to explain it away. I will need to examine them, Lyra said formally. I will need to verify everything you claim, and I will need access to all data related to the bonding process. If your claims are true, then this will change everything about how the Galactic Council views humanity. But if you are deceiving us, I promise you that I will ensure your species faces consequences the likes of which you cannot imagine. Marcus met her gaze directly. We would expect nothing less, he said. We know that trust takes time, and we are willing to prove ourselves to you. Come, meet the dragons. Let them show you what is possible when different species choose connection over conflict. As they descended toward the hangar, Lyra felt her ancient heart begin to race. She had come here expecting to expose a deception. She had come here ready to protect her people from what she was certain was a human trick. But watching the dragons move and feeling the strange energy that seemed to emanate from them, she began to wonder if perhaps she had been wrong about humanity. It was a thought that terrified her more than any weapon ever could. The hangar smelled of ozone and something ancient, something that reminded Lyra of the deep caves where the oldest elven shrines stood. The air itself seemed to vibrate with energy as she and Marcus descended the metal stairs to the floor where the dragons rested. Her hand instinctively moved to the weapon at her side, but Marcus gently shook his head. No weapons, he said softly. They will not harm you unless they perceive a threat. And weapons are something they associate with the old ways, with dominance and control. If you want them to trust you, you must show that you come in peace. Lyra slowly removed her energy weapon and handed it to one of the waiting technicians. She had not been without a weapon in 300 years. The feeling of vulnerability was unsettling, but she forced herself to remain calm. If humans could approach these creatures without weapons, then so could she. As they walked across the hangar floor, Lyra became acutely aware of the dragons watching her. The crimson one that Marcus had called Emberclaw turned his massive head to follow her movement. The emerald green dragon stood and stretched, his wings unfolding to reveal a span that seemed to stretch across the entire width of the hangar. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. Those wings could shred a building. Those claws could pierce through armor. This was not a tame creature. This was a predator of the highest order. Yet something in the dragon's eyes was not aggressive. There was intelligence there, a kind of ancient awareness that made Lyra feel suddenly very small. Kelly approached them, still moving with the relaxed confidence of someone completely at ease. She extended her hand to Lyra in the human greeting gesture. "I am Kelly," she said with a warm smile. "Emberclaw has been curious about you since you arrived." "He can sense elven magic, I think. It calls to something in him." "Dragons do not have curiosity," Lyra said, but even as she spoke the words, she knew they were wrong. She could see curiosity in every line of the dragon's body as he slowly moved closer to her. "Humans did not have compassion according to you," Kelly replied gently. "Yet here we are. Perhaps both our species have been more than what the galaxy believed we could be." The emerald dragon approached Lyra directly. The movement was slow and deliberate, nothing like the aggressive stalking of a hunter. This was something else, something more like the way a mother might approach a frightened child. The dragon lowered his massive head until his eyes were level with Lyra's own. She could see herself reflected in those ancient eyes. She could see the fear and the wonder and the strange hope that was beginning to bloom in her chest. The dragon's breath was warm and smelled like electricity and starlight. In that moment, Lyra understood that this creature was not a beast to be dominated. This was a being with its own thoughts, its own feelings, its own capacity for choice. "This is Star Whisper," Marcus said from somewhere behind her. "She is the eldest of the three dragons. She has been more patient with us than the others, allowing us time to understand her. I believe she wants to speak with you." Lyra started to laugh, to mock the idea that a dragon could communicate with words. But then something happened. A warmth spread through her mind like spilled honey, and suddenly she was not standing in a hangar anymore. She was standing in a vast desert under alien stars. She could feel the sand beneath her feet, could taste the dry air. She could feel the immense weight of loneliness. The images came faster now, flooding her consciousness. She saw the dragons as they had been in ancient times when the galaxy was young and new. She saw them flying through vast nebulae, living in harmony with the ancient elves and other civilizations long since forgotten. She saw the slow decline of those civilizations, the wars that had torn apart the fabric of peaceful coexistence. She saw the dragons retreating into dormancy as everything they had known fell into chaos and ruin. She felt their despair at waking to find the galaxy so changed. She felt their fear of the new species that filled the stars with violence and greed. She felt their shock when humans approached without weapons, when humans looked into their eyes and saw not prey or conquest, but equals deserving of respect. When the vision faded, Lyra found herself on her knees. Tears streamed down her face and her mind struggled to process what she had experienced. It had been more than just images. It had been emotion, memory, fundamental truth shared from one consciousness to another. Star Whisper can share her experiences with those she trusts, Marcus said quietly. She has shown you her memories because she believes you are capable of understanding what she has learned. She believes humanity is worth saving, worth trusting. She hopes that you will come to believe that too. Lyra looked up at the dragon and suddenly she saw her completely differently. This was not a monster. This was a being who had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. This was a creature who had every reason to hate and fear all the younger species, and yet chose instead to hope that they could be better. The weight of that revelation settled on Lyra's shoulders like a mantle. "How long?" Lyra asked, her voice rough with emotion. "How long has she been trying to reach out to your people?" 3 months, Kelly said. "After we freed them from the crystalline formations, they were angry and confused. We thought they would kill us all. But gradually they began to realize that we were different, that we were not the species who had put them there in the first place, that we might be capable of genuine change." Over the following hours, Lyra observed the humans and the dragons interacting. She watched as they moved together with an almost choreographed grace. She watched as they sat in silence together, apparently communicating in ways that transcended words. She watched as a young man named David sat with the smaller crimson dragon, his hand resting on the dragon's scaled neck, both of them completely still and at peace. It was perhaps the most profound thing Lyra had ever witnessed. This was not the relationship between master and servant. This was not the dynamic of conqueror and conquered. This was something that transcended the usual hierarchies of dominance, that structured most relationships between different species. When evening came, Marcus invited her to join them for a meal in the crew quarters. The human food was strange to her, but she forced herself to eat. Around the table, she listened to the humans speak about their experiences with the dragons. Each story was different, yet they all shared a common thread. Each human who had bonded with a dragon spoke of a fundamental transformation in how they understood themselves and the universe. "Before Emberclaw, I was lost," Kelly said, her eyes distant with memory. "I had been a soldier my whole life. I fought wars for causes I did not even believe in anymore. When I got infected on that colony, I thought my life was over, and maybe it was. Maybe the woman I was before the infection died, but Emberclaw saved me not just by healing my body, but by showing me that there was another way to live. He showed me that connection is possible even between beings as different as we are." David spoke about how Star Whisper's memories had changed his understanding of time and history. "She showed me what it means to live for centuries and watch civilizations rise and fall," he said. "It put my own struggles into perspective. It made me realize that the small problems I had been obsessing over were insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. But it also made me understand that every moment we share with someone we care about is infinitely precious, because we never know how long we will have with them." Lyra listened and said very little. She felt the walls she had built over 3 centuries beginning to crack and crumble. She wanted to maintain her skepticism, her certainty about human nature, but the evidence was overwhelming. She could not deny what she had seen. She could not deny what she had felt when Star Whisper had shared her memories. When night fell, Marcus showed her to her quarters. She stood at the window looking out at the stars and thought about the elven homeworld. She thought about how her people had hidden themselves away from the galaxy for so long. Convinced that other species were incapable of genuine change or growth, she wondered how many opportunities for real connection her people had missed because of that fear. The next morning, Lyra did something she had not done in 3 centuries. She requested to be bonded with one of the dragons. Not Star Whisper, who already had a connection with David. Not Emberclaw, who was bound to Kelly. But the third dragon, the smaller crimson one, who had watched her from a distance with those intelligent eyes. "Her name is Flameheart," Marcus told her as he led Lyra back to the hangar. "She has been waiting for her bonded partner, someone who could understand her fierce independence and her deep need for freedom. I think she has been waiting for you." As Lyra approached the dragon, she removed her armor piece by piece, letting it fall to the floor. She wanted Flameheart to see her not as a warrior or a diplomat, but as herself, just as she was, vulnerable and uncertain and open to whatever connection might form between them. Flameheart's eyes glowed with something that might have been recognition, or hope, or love. Lyra reached out her hand and touched the dragon's scaled cheek, and in that moment, as their connection began to form, Lyra felt something she had thought was impossible. She felt home. The bonding process was not what Lyra had expected. She had assumed it would be instantaneous, a sudden connection that would transform her completely. Instead, it was gradual and nuanced, like 2 melodies learning to harmonize. Over the course of the first week, Lyra began to experience moments of intense clarity where her thoughts seemed to merge with Flameheart's consciousness. At first, these moments terrified her. She felt like she was losing herself, dissolving into something larger and stranger, but Flameheart was patient. The dragon would show her images and sensations, then gradually pull back, allowing Lyra time to process and understand what she was experiencing. It was an act of tremendous compassion from a being who had every reason to be wary of elves. Lyra learned that Flameheart had been born in the depths of space itself. She had never known a homeworld or a natural sky. Her entire existence had been an endless journey through the void, searching for others of her kind. When she and her siblings had entered the crystalline formations to rest, they had expected to waken a galaxy that had learned to value peace and cooperation. Instead, they had woken to find that most of the ancient civilizations were gone, replaced by younger species still learning what it meant to coexist. But then humans had found them. Humans who looked at 3 giant dragons with wonder instead of fear. Humans who had tried to communicate instead of control. And gradually, Flameheart had begun to believe that perhaps this younger species was capable of transcending the patterns that had destroyed the ancient worlds. During one of their deeper connection moments, Flameheart shared a memory with Lyra that changed everything. Lyra found herself watching the ancient past through the dragon's eyes. She saw the elves and the dragons of 10,000 years ago, living in harmony across multiple star systems. She saw the technology that civilization had developed, a blend of magic and science that had allowed them to build cities that floated between stars. And then she saw the fall. She saw the wars that had torn that civilization apart, when different factions began to disagree about how power should be distributed. She saw the devastation as weapons of unimaginable power were unleashed. She saw the dragons choosing to go into dormancy rather than participate in the destruction. When the memory faded, Lyra understood something profound. Her people had not always been isolated and fearful. The elves had once been great and mighty, capable of standing as equals with creatures like dragons. But they had fallen, and the shame of that fall had caused her people to retreat from the galaxy. Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra spent almost every waking moment with Flameheart. She learned the dragon's preferences and personality quirks. She learned that Flameheart loved the feeling of solar wind on her scales, and the sight of binary stars rising over the horizon. She learned that Flameheart had a dry sense of humor, and could express disapproval through a series of snorts and rumbling sounds. But most importantly, she learned that Flameheart trusted her. The dragon began to allow Lyra to ride on her back, flying through the hangar in great arcing movements that made Lyra's heart sing. She began to share more vulnerable moments, times when the dragon's ancient loneliness seemed to overwhelm her, and Lyra found herself offering comfort and connection in ways she had never done with anyone before. One evening, as Lyra sat with Flameheart's head resting in her lap, stroking the dragon's scaled forehead, Flameheart shared a new kind of image. Instead of memories from the past, this was a vision of the future. Lyra saw a galaxy transformed. She saw humans and elves and dragons working together to restore the ancient civilizations. She saw knowledge being shared freely, wisdom flowing between species like water finding its natural course. She saw herself standing before the Galactic Council, advocating for a new way of thinking about interspecies relationships. She saw the resistance from those who wanted to maintain the old hierarchies. But she also saw the growing support from younger species who believed that genuine cooperation was possible. Most importantly, she saw Flameheart beside her throughout all of it, a constant presence of strength and compassion. When the vision faded, Lyra found tears on her face again. She had spent her entire long life thinking that species were fundamentally separated by biology and culture, that real connection between them was impossible. But here was proof that she had been wrong. Here was a being of pure ancient power choosing to share her existence with someone who had once thought dragons were nothing but beasts. Marcus found her there the next morning, still sitting with Flameheart. "You are ready," he said quietly. "Ready to return to the Galactic Council and tell them what you have learned." Lyra looked up at him. "I was sent here to investigate and verify your claims," she said. "I was supposed to determine whether humanity had genuinely changed or if this was some elaborate deception. But I realize now that is the wrong question to ask. The question is not whether humanity has changed. The question is whether any of us have the courage to change, whether we have the strength to put aside our fears and prejudices and try to connect with beings so fundamentally different from ourselves." "And what is your answer?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Lyra said simply. "Yes, we have that courage. At least I do. And I believe others will too, once they understand what is possible." The journey back to the Galactic Council headquarters took 12 days. Lyra spent every moment of those days either communicating with Flameheart through their bond, or reviewing the data she had collected. She prepared her report carefully, knowing that every word would be scrutinized. She knew that many species would resist what she was proposing, but she also knew that the truth was on her side. When she arrived at the council, her fellow ambassadors gathered to hear her findings. The Krell, who were known for their rigid adherence to tradition, looked skeptical. The Xanthari, an ancient species who had seen many civilizations rise and fall, watched her with careful eyes. The Zephyr representatives, creatures of pure energy contained in artificial shells, seemed curious but non-committal. Lyra stood before them and told her truth. She spoke of Star Whisper's memories and the ancient bond between elves and dragons. She spoke of Flameheart's journey through the void and her desperate hope for connection. She spoke of Kelly and David and Marcus, humans who had risked their own safety to show compassion to creatures that could have killed them easily. But most importantly, she showed them the data, She showed them the neural patterns of bonded pairs, demonstrating the profound connection that formed between human and dragon. She showed them the genetic compatibility, proving that the bond was not based on tricks or manipulation, but on genuine biological and psychological compatibility. And she asked them a simple question. If a species capable of creating such genuine connections with beings so different from themselves existed in our galaxy, should we not want them as allies instead of enemies? The debate lasted for hours. Some ambassadors argued that the bonding might be temporary, that humans might eventually turn the dragons into weapons. Others claimed that the whole thing was a hoax designed to infiltrate the council. But gradually, the evidence in Lyra's testimony began to shift the conversation. The Zenthari ambassador, whose species had lived for over 1 million years, spoke in favor of accepting humanity's claims. I have seen many species rise and fall, the ancient being said. I have witnessed the destruction that comes from fear and prejudice. But I have also witnessed the transformation that can occur when we dare to believe that others are capable of change. This Lyra speaks truth. I have read it in her testimony and I can feel it in her presence. She has been transformed by what she has experienced. And if an elf, a being as ancient and proud as the Zenthari, can be transformed by encountering humanity's capacity for compassion, then perhaps we should all reconsider our assumptions. After 17 hours of debate, the vote was called. Lyra stood quietly as each ambassador cast their judgment. When the final count was tallied, humanity had achieved the impossible. They had been accepted into the Galactic Council as equals. Every single species, moved by the testimony of an ancient elf and the evidence of genuine connection between human and dragon, voted in favor of welcoming humanity into the fold. That night, Lyra sent a message to Flameheart across the vast distance of space. She told the dragon about the vote. She told her about how their bond had changed the fate of an entire species. She told her that the future they had envisioned together in Flameheart's vision was beginning to unfold. And through their connection, she felt the dragon's joy. It was a joy that transcended species and distance and time. It was the joy of knowing that you had been part of something important, that your existence had mattered, that love and connection could indeed change the universe. As Lyra prepared to return to the Starlight Navigator, she smiled for the first time in 300 years with genuine joy. She was going home not to some distant elven outpost but to Flameheart, and together, they would help shape a new galaxy, one based on connection instead of conquest, on love instead of fear. The return journey to the Starlight Navigator felt different this time. Lyra sat in her cabin and watched the stars pass by, feeling the familiar warmth of Flameheart's consciousness at the edge of her own. The dragon was excited and anxious, eager to hear everything that had transpired at the council. But more than that, Flameheart was eager to show Lyra something new, something important that the dragon had been preparing. When Lyra finally arrived at the Starlight Navigator, she found the entire crew assembled in the central hub. Marcus approached her with a wide smile, and Kelly stood beside him, her hand resting on Emberclaw's massive neck. David was there too, and Star Whisper stood beside him with an air of ancient wisdom. "Welcome home," Marcus said, and Lyra felt a strange sense of rightness at hearing those words. This had become her home. The ship, the dragons, the humans who had shown her a new way of existing in the universe. These were the things that mattered most to her now. "We have much to celebrate," Kelly said. "Flameheart has completed the first stage of something unprecedented. Come, we want you to see." They led Lyra to a section of the ship she had not been taken to before. It was a massive chamber, and as soon as she entered, her breath caught. The room was filled with crystalline structures similar to those that had held the dragons in dormancy, but these crystals were glowing with soft light, and she could sense energy moving through them in complex patterns. "We have been working with the dragons to understand how the crystalline structures function," David explained. Star Whisper shared her knowledge with us. "These formations are not just dormancy chambers. They are information repositories. They contain the accumulated knowledge of ancient civilizations preserved for millions of years." Lyra walked slowly around the chamber, her eyes wide with wonder. "This is incredible," she whispered. "The elves had legends about such structures, but we always thought they were myths. What is stored in them?" "Everything," a new voice said, and Lyra turned to see Flameheart entering the chamber. The dragon moved with purposeful grace and stood directly in front of Lyra, Through their bond, she felt the dragon's intention. This was important. This was the gift that Flameheart had been preparing, Marcus explained as Flameheart projected images into the air. The dragons have agreed to share the contents of these crystal repositories with the Galactic Council. But they wanted you to be the first to see what they contain. They believe that the elves should reclaim what was lost when the ancient civilization fell. Lyra watched in amazement as images and data flooded the chamber. She saw ancient elven architecture, beautiful beyond anything she had ever imagined. She saw scientific formulas and magical theories that had been lost for 10,000 years. She saw art and music and philosophy. She saw the complete history of her people written in crystal and light. But most importantly, she saw something else. She saw a message, left by the ancient elves who had gone into dormancy alongside the dragons. The message was for her people, for the elves who would come after when the time was right for them to reclaim their place in the galaxy. The message was simple but profound. We did not fail. We learned. We chose to rest so that we could awaken when the universe was ready to receive us again. We left these crystals with the dragons, our oldest and most trusted companions. When you find them, when you are ready to listen, know that there is another way to live. A way based not on power and domination, but on genuine connection and mutual growth. Tears streamed down Lyra's face as she watched the message play out in crystal light. Her entire life, her people had believed themselves to be broken, diminished, unworthy of standing alongside the great powers of the galaxy. But it was not true. Her people had simply been sleeping, waiting for the moment when they could wake up and rejoin the greater community of conscious beings. Why did they show you this? Lyra asked Flameheart, though she suspected she knew the answer. Through their bond, she felt the dragon's response. Because you opened your heart to us. Because you were willing to see beyond prejudice and fear to understand our nature. Because you are the bridge between what was and what will be. Your testimony to the council was powerful, but this is more powerful still. This is the evidence that the elves are not a fallen people. You are an ancient people who are ready to rise again. That night, Lyra broadcasted a message to the Galactic Council. She told them about the crystal repositories and the knowledge they contained. She told them that the dragons were willing to share the accumulated wisdom of ancient civilizations with all species who were committed to using that knowledge for peaceful purposes. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, multiple species requested diplomatic missions to the Starlight Navigator. The Krell, who had been most skeptical about humanity, sent their most senior representative, an ancient being who had served on the council for over 5,000 years. The Zephyr requested access to the scientific data. Even the most isolated and xenophobic species began to reconsider their stance. But not everyone was pleased. A faction of species, particularly those who had built their power on secrecy and dominance, saw the sharing of ancient knowledge as a threat. They began to organize resistance, spreading propaganda that the humans and dragons were manipulating the other species, that this was all part of an elaborate conspiracy. Lyra found herself in the position she had always held on the council, but now everything had changed. She was no longer advocating for caution and isolation. She was advocating for change and connection. And she was not alone. Many ambassadors who had seemed unmovable were now actively supporting the new direction. Over the following weeks, the Starlight Navigator became a hub of activity. Scientists from a dozen different species worked together to analyze the crystal repositories. Diplomats negotiated new trade agreements based on mutual benefit rather than dominance. And humans and dragons continued their work of forming bonds with representatives from other species who were ready to open their hearts. Lyra watched as Kelly helped a young Krell explore the possibility of bonding with Emberclaw. The Krell, a species known for their emotional restraint, found themselves overwhelmed by the dragon's profound empathy and ancient wisdom. Lyra had never seen a Krell cry before, but now tears were streaming down the alien's angular face. I did not know that such connection was possible, the Krell said. My entire species has been taught to value discipline and control above all things. But this dragon is showing me that there is strength in vulnerability, that there is power in genuine feeling. This became the pattern. One by one, species that had maintained distance from others for millennia began to explore the possibility of real connection. And each time someone opened themselves up to that possibility, they were transformed. Lyra found herself becoming an unexpected leader in this transformation. Her testimony had started the process, but her continued work was what sustained it. She traveled between the council chambers and the Starlight Navigator repeatedly, advocating for new policies that would encourage interspecies connection rather than competition. The opposition grew more vocal, but Lyra was no longer afraid of them. She had Flameheart's strength supporting her. She had the knowledge of the ancient civilizations flowing through the crystal repositories, and most importantly, she had hope. One evening, as she stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars, Marcus approached her. "You have changed everything," he said quietly. 3 months ago, you arrived here certain that we were deceptive and destructive. Now you are the most vocal advocate for humanity within the Galactic Council. How did this happen?" Lyra smiled. "I learned what it means to be loved unconditionally," she said. "Flameheart showed me that connection was possible even across the vast gulfs of biology and history that seemed to separate us. If that was possible, then anything was possible. If love could bridge the distance between an elf and a dragon, then it could bridge any divide." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That is what we have been trying to prove from the beginning. That love is the most powerful force in the universe. More powerful than weapons or technology or accumulated knowledge. When you truly love something that is different from yourself, it breaks down all the walls you have built." "I am beginning to understand that," Lyra said. "And I am beginning to believe that this is the future the galaxy needs. Not beings standing apart, guarding their secrets and their power, but beings working together, sharing knowledge and compassion, building something greater than any single species could create alone." Behind them, Flameheart appeared on the observation deck. The dragon settled beside Lyra with a contented rumble, and Lyra reached up to stroke the dragon's scaled neck. Through their bond, she felt Flameheart's happiness and approval. This was what the future would look like. This was the galaxy that the ancient elves had dreamed of when they left their message in crystal. This was what Lyra had been meant to help create. 6 months had passed since the Galactic Council voted to accept humanity as equals. The galaxy had transformed in ways that seemed impossible just a year earlier. Trade had increased between species. Scientific collaboration had produced breakthrough discoveries that would have taken centuries working in isolation. And, most importantly, the barriers between different civilizations had begun to crumble as genuine friendships and bonds formed across species lines, but not without resistance. The faction that opposed the new order had grown more aggressive. They called themselves the Preservationists, and they believed that species should remain separate and distinct, that interspecies bonding was an abomination that would lead to cultural extinction. Their propaganda had found purchase among some populations, particularly among those who felt threatened by rapid change. Lyra was working late in her office when the attack alert came through. The Preservationists had launched a coordinated assault on several diplomatic stations throughout the galaxy. They had used advanced weaponry to disable communication systems and had taken hostages from multiple species. Among those captured was David, who had been traveling with Star Whisper on a goodwill mission to a frontier colony. Lyra felt her heart clench with fear. She immediately contacted Marcus aboard the Starlight Navigator. Within minutes, he was on a secure communication channel with her. "We are launching a rescue mission," Marcus said, his voice tense with purpose. "Star Whisper is already preparing for departure. She will not leave David in their hands." "This is what they want," Lyra warned. "They want us to respond with force. They want to prove that we are no different from the warlike species we claim to have evolved beyond." "We cannot just leave him there," Kelly said, her voice fierce with protective anger. Lyra could see her in the background already donning her combat armor. Lyra closed her eyes and reached out to Flameheart. Through their bond, she felt the dragon's concern and desire for action. But she also felt something else, something deeper. She felt Flameheart's ancient wisdom, her understanding of how these situations had unfolded countless times throughout history. An idea began to form in Lyra's mind. "There is another way," she said slowly. "Not through force, but through the same thing that brought us together in the first place. Through connection." Marcus leaned forward.
"What do you mean?"
"The Preservationists believe that interspecies bonding is wrong," Lyra explained. "They believe it will destroy individual cultures. But they have never experienced what that bonding actually feels like. They have never felt the profound respect and individuality that continues to exist, even when two beings connect at the deepest level. What if we could show them?" Kelly shook her head. "They will not listen to words." "No," Lyra agreed. but they might listen to experience. Get me a communication channel to their leader. Tell them I wish to negotiate the release of the hostages. An hour later, Lyra found herself face-to-face on a video screen with a being called Chancellor Vorn. He was Krell, one of the older species, and his eyes held the rigid certainty of someone absolutely convinced of their righteousness. "You have come to beg for the release of your people," Vorn said coldly. "That is wise. Perhaps there is hope for you yet." "I have not come to beg," Lyra said calmly. "I have come to make a proposal. You believe that interspecies bonding is a perversion that will destroy individual cultures. You believe that beings like myself have been corrupted by our connections with dragons and humans. I challenge you to experience what you condemn. I challenge you to meet with Star Whisper and allow her to share her memories with you, the way dragons share with those they bond with. Allow yourself one moment of genuine understanding. If after that you still believe bonding is wrong, I will advocate to the Council for the immediate cessation of all interspecies bonding programs." Vorn's expression hardened. "This is a trick." "It is not," Lyra said. "I swear on the honor of my ancient people. I swear on my bond with Flameheart. I am willing to stake everything I have built on the power of what I am offering you. One moment of genuine connection. That is all I ask." There was a long silence. Then Vorn leaned back in his seat. "Very well," he said. "I will allow your dragon to contact my consciousness. But if this is indeed a trick, the hostages will die. All of them." Within hours, a small delegation from the Starlight Navigator was aboard the Preservationist station. Lyra went with them, along with Star Whisper, who had insisted on conducting the experience herself. They met Vorn in a neutral chamber, and for the first time, the ancient Krell was face-to-face with a dragon. Vorn's rigid posture betrayed his fear, but he did not flee. Star Whisper approached him slowly, the same way she had approached Lyra on that first day, and then she began to share her memories. Lyra watched as Vorn's expression transformed. She could see the moment the dragon's ancient memories began to flow into the Krell's consciousness. She saw the shock, the wonder, the growing comprehension of what Star Whisper was showing him. She saw tears begin to form in the alien's eyes. When the connection finally faded, Vorn stood in silence for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was trembling. "I saw," he said softly. "I saw what you have seen. I understood what it means to lose everything and still choose to love the beings who might have caused that loss. I felt the isolation of 10 million years spent watching civilizations rise and fall. I experienced the hope of meeting humans and discovering that change was possible." Vorn looked directly at Lyra. "I have spent the last decade convinced that I was protecting my people from corruption. But I was wrong. I was protecting them from hope. I was protecting them from the possibility of real growth and change. I ask your forgiveness, and I ask permission to bring my entire delegation aboard your vessel so that they too can experience what I have just experienced." The hostages were released immediately. Over the next week, hundreds of preservationists were transported to the Starlight Navigator to meet the dragons and experience what genuine interspecies connection felt like. Some refused the experience, clinging to their old beliefs, but many accepted the offer, and one by one their perspective transformed. David was reunited with Star Whisper, and Lyra saw the joy that flooded through both of them at being reunited. She understood completely. She had felt similar joy every time she was separated from Flameheart, and then came back together with her bonded partner. The preservationist movement did not disappear entirely, but it lost its momentum. Within a few months, Vorn himself was advocating at the Council for greater support for interspecies bonding programs. He became one of the strongest voices arguing that diversity of connection was not a weakness but a strength for the galaxy. A year after the hostage crisis, Lyra stood in the Great Chamber of the Galactic Council and made a historic announcement. The Council had voted unanimously to establish the Dragons and Bonding Initiative, a program designed to help any species that wished to explore the possibility of connecting with the ancient dragons. The dragons themselves, in a display of unprecedented trust, had agreed to share more of the crystal repositories, making the accumulated knowledge of ancient civilizations available to all species in the galaxy. But more than that, the vote represented something even more significant. It represented the official acceptance by the Galactic Council that connection and cooperation were superior to isolation and competition. It represented the recognition that genuine love was not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be celebrated. That evening, Lyra returned to the Starlight Navigator for what had become her second home. She walked through the corridors she now knew as well as her own reflection, and made her way to the observation deck where she knew Flameheart would be waiting. The dragon was there, silhouetted against the vast expanse of stars. Lyra walked to her bonded partner and rested her forehead against Flameheart's scaled neck. Through their bond, they did not need words. They shared instead a profound sense of completion and rightness. "It is done," Lyra said finally. "The future we envisioned together has begun. The galaxy will never be the same." Through their connection, Flameheart projected an image of what was to come. Lyra saw colonies established jointly by humans and dragons and elves. She saw universities where young beings from 100 different species studied together, learning not just academic subjects but also how to understand and respect each other. She saw families composed of different species, bound together by genuine love and commitment. She saw a galaxy transformed, and then Flameheart showed her something more personal, an image of her and Flameheart, standing together centuries into the future, still bonded, still growing, still discovering new ways to connect and understand each other. Lyra felt tears on her face, but they were tears of joy. "I came here as an investigator," she said softly. "I came here to expose what I was certain was a deception. Instead, I found something far more valuable than truth. I found connection. I found love. I found the future." Flameheart's response came not in words but in a feeling that washed over Lyra like warm light. It was gratitude and joy and a love so profound that it transcended the boundaries between one consciousness and another. It was the feeling of being truly seen and accepted for exactly who you were. It was the feeling of coming home.